Hey, we're George and James, and today we're filming for the first time Getting Pretentious with Arcade Fire's The Suburbs. How's it going, James?
Good. This is new, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, for anyone listening, and who is a loyal listener, don't worry. Podcasts are still going to be going up as usual every Friday. But you will also be able to every Monday now. So the Monday after the Friday that the podcast comes out, we will be uploading a video version to YouTube, which is what you're watching now, hopefully.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is exciting.
New and exciting.
Yeah.
Well, actually, this is mostly coming because we planned on maybe doing this probably about 10 episodes ago.
And then lockdown happened.
Yeah. So this is actually our first time recording even in the same room, let alone with a camera.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Mental. So if you're new to the show on YouTube, then click the subscribe and all that to watch us every week. And also head over to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the usual places. Subscribe there, follow us there to get the audio every Friday. And if you're new to the podcast, this is a podcast where me and George talk about a different album each week. And this week, as George mentioned, it's The Suburbs by Arcade Fire. But first, George, what have you been listening to this week?
Now this is actually a good thing about filming, because I've just recently Glass Animals.
We can now show you things.
Glass Animals just released a nice new album called Dreamland. We managed to get this beautiful little picture disc that they released on a mail list, and
so then the idea for anyone listening,
as it spins, there's heads on the vinyl that slowly rotate that are like 3D captured versions of the band members.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. In all fairness though, James, we have been on quite a vinyl spree.
We have.
The last
to be fair, I got the new Fontaine's DC album that came out recently. Hero's Death, is that what it's called?
Hero's Death, I think, yeah.
And it's good. I really like it. It's much better than the first album. I liked the first album, but I think it's a step up for them.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say the second album's much better.
I think it's just I think the songs are fairly similar to the first record.
Yeah.
Although I think maybe slightly more intelligently written, maybe. But I think mainly it comes down to the production. I think the production is just a lot more...
Well, they are quite young, aren't they?
Well thought out on the new album.
Yeah, this is something that you wouldn't have seen before, but we do quite often research
during the
podcast.
And George is struggling to work out how to spell Fontaine's DC.
Fontaine's.
It's without the U, George.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because it's not fountains, is it?
No.
But yeah, they're relatively new. What, 2 years since the first album? They're quite a young band from what I've seen. So the fact that they're releasing albums this quickly, of quite high standard and a lot of old school, quite old punk inspiration, old post-punk. It feels like the 90s.
Yeah, it's a very 90s record. I think he's got that sort of that Gallagher sort of swagger to his performance, I think. But in a less sort of annoying way. He's almost a bit more... I also think I think you could see them live and maybe mistake them as being a bit like that sort of Gallagher swagger. But I think they're a bit more... if you listen to the lyrics and stuff like that, I think they are a bit more thoughtful than maybe they first appear.
Yeah.
I think some of their songs can be actually quite lyrically quite strong, which I think if you just see them like if you just flicked over and it was, well, not this year, but like a Glastonbury performance or something on telly, I think you would just assume they're just this sort of
quite arrogant,
punk sort of outfit. But
they are definitely one of those bands that, like, I've heard people say you need to go see Fontaines DC live. Not so much go listen to them, it's you should go see them live. Similar to Idols.
Yeah.
I would say to someone, go watch Idols live, then go and listen to their music.
Yeah.
Although I do love their albums, the live experiences are different.
Yeah, I still haven't seen Fontaines live. I've been supposed to have seen them twice, and then so like I was supposed to see them at Trap Festival, but then I think one of the band got ill or something, so then they like pulled out like on the weekend of the festival, which was annoying. And then I was supposed to see them at Brixton at the start of the year, but then like triple booked myself and couldn't go.
Yeah, I remember that.
So I would like to, I still want to see them live. Hopefully, I guess they'll tour the new album when we can do tours again.
That'll be exciting.
And actually, if anything, I'm more excited to see them now, having heard the second album, because I think I like it a lot more immediately than the first album.
Tell you who I'm looking forward to seeing live again, Leanne Havis.
Yes, that's come out recently.
Oh, actually,
again, we got another record.
We were lucky again with this one. My partner was very ahead of the game and got the wonderful signed edition of the new Leanne Havis album. And I tell you, like, I only listened to it all the way through once because I was like, I'm going to listen to it on the vinyl first. It's a vinyl record in my mind. It's good, though.
It sounds really nice on vinyl as well.
It's so honest.
Yeah, because she's been, like, when was her last album? Like I want to say like 2016 or something. It's been a while.
It's been
since the first album.
It was, what's it called? Bad Blood? No, Blood.
2015. 2015, I was so close.
5 years.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
But I tell you what, I'm very glad that it's a self-titled album because it's the first. However, I like her first album, very sweet. It's very much a first album record. Second album was like, all right,
step up.
We've now got money. And I think that was almost slightly a bad thing. Like some parts were almost overproduced for what I would expect from Leanne Havis.
Fair. Although I think it's really where she sort of took off, isn't it?
And made like
and
green
like
and
just
gold.
like just in terms of looking at the artwork, just like visually like a step up as well.
Yeah.
Like that's a really, I mean, I don't know what she did for like the rest of the album in terms of like music videos and stuff, but just that artwork, which if you're watching the YouTube, I'll put up a thing of the artwork so you can see what I'm talking about. But there's that sort of, it's a very nicely arranged photograph, that album cover.
But I just like, it still feels too crisp. A bit too,
this one feels a lot more honest, doesn't it?
Which is what her voice is suited to. And her lyrics.
Yeah.
Like the whole new album is just so emotional and...
Which comes through with the self-titling. It's like it's a bit like we've talked about Kiwanuka before. And that was his third album as well. And again, it felt like he was going quite personal with it. And we talked about at the time, like, it's about him and like all the artwork with him dressed as an African king. It's like his heritage and like his background and just
understanding oneself.
Yeah, and I think like Leanne Havis has sort of done it here. Like all the artwork and the photos are very sort of up close, personal. Sort of looks like they could have been captured in like just her with her mate, like going around taking photos, sort of thing, rather than a prearranged photo shoot.
Yeah.
And so I think that comes that translates as well to the music, I think.
And I think it's going to make her live performance so much better as well. Because me and my partner, we went to see her at Earth Hackney.
Nice venue. Yeah.
Oh, love it. And there was such a good place to see someone like Leanne Havis because it feels like a theatre. So it feels so personal.
Yeah.
Because I also went to see Go Go Penguin there when they did the, was it?
Koyaanisqatsi.
Yeah, Koyaanisqatsi, like, full thing. And it was it's a theatrical performance.
Yeah, because I saw the SLP there.
Oh, how was that?
That was, well, he made it like a
bit more personal.
No, I'd say like more theatrical. Like every song, he came out in like a
different outfit,
a different like jacket or outfit or something, and like he had this interesting setup with like screens and then sort of projecting stuff or projecting his like silhouette. Like visually, it was really kind of cool. Like I'm still not sure really about that album. No. It does just feel like a load of Kasabian B-sides, which, given the news that we've just had about Kasabian, which we won't go into, it feels...
Maybe we'll put a little thing up in the top of the video so you can learn about it if you don't know.
Maybe they were supposed to be Kasabian songs, and his live performance was really interesting because he really sort of took advantage of just... Because I don't think he's necessarily a natural frontman, like... No. Which is why you had Tom and Kasabian being that frontman. So I think he really sort of used the space as best he could to make it sort of... The band was sort of behind the screen a bit, sort of guerrilla style, and he was out front, and then they would do sort of interesting silhouette stuff.
I must admit, that album did feel kind of rushed in its kind of promotion and release.
Sort of just came, like, oh, he's doing a thing. Oh, now it's out.
Yeah, very much. What was that new, which member of Radiohead?
Oh, Ed O'Brien.
Ed O'Brien, yeah.
Or EOB as he's going by on that record.
I can't get on board with that. I tried giving it a listen the other day.
It's hit and miss for me. There's some tracks I really like.
Yeah.
But it feels a bit... I think we're going to talk about Tom York's Anima at some point. Probably the next episode. That feels like a very, like, that's like a body of work that's been thought out and completed as an album.
Yeah.
The EOB record seems a bit like he sort of had these songs for a while and then...
It's a compilation of stuff that he's worked on while doing Radiohead for the last, like, 20 years.
So there's this sort of a variety of different styles going on. And, some work better than others. I have to say that he did look quite good at the Six Music Festival, from what I saw. So I'd quite like to go and see him live doing it.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where, like, maybe when he does another... Maybe this was something that he needed to just get off his chest.
Yeah.
And then when he works on the next album, it will be, like, something more
Yeah, because there's no denying, like... I mean, obviously, like, being in radio... He can certainly, like, play and do all that stuff. And he's got a decent voice.
But even Tom York's first solo record was quite staggered in, like, pacing and topic. It was just like, all right, I'm doing something not Radiohead. Let's just do everything. Yeah. That's probably what this is for EOB a bit.
Yeah, I think he needs to, like, do a bit more and then he'll be on it.
But Arcade Fire's The Suburbs.
Now that is an album that doesn't struggle with the pacing, or that feels like a complete body of work that's just really...
But that is something that Arcade Fire do. Like, by this point you'd had Funeral back in 2004, and then... Oh, a little throat noise. And then you had Neon Bible, I think, in 2007. And then this came out, Suburbs, 2010. Each one of those albums had a very clear image, scenery, idea. But then even since that, Reflector, Everything Now, they are a band that have mastered not so much concept album, but just like a mood album.
A vision. They've got like a vision for like each one. And some work better than others. Like Everything Now for me was a bit sort of all over the place in terms of quality for me. Quality's harsh, but you know what I mean, like in terms of like which songs I enjoyed. But then even then, like I've got the the vinyl of everything now, and just like the packaging it comes in, and like there's like all sorts of brochures and advertisements inside that relate to each song that reflect the sort of corporate the message about corporate entities taking over and all that kind of stuff that sort of elevated the album a little bit for me, even though I wasn't really sure I was that into the music. It was just like, at least they've got a real...
I don't know about you, but for me, Everything Now felt a little bit like a Killers record from back in like early kind of 2010s.
I could see that, yeah.
Like the kind of Human era.
Yeah, which is like where I drifted out of love with the Killers.
It's a weird album, but we're not talking about that.
No,
because The Suburbs, for me, The Suburbs was when they reached a peak. Like, Reflector is a good album. I'd still love that album, but The Suburbs was hitting that double album length and then still getting awards, high ratings, and still keeping a consistent body of work together.
Yeah.
Like, it changed the indie music scene quite a lot. Like, it just kind of dropped, and suddenly the standard of indie music. 'Cause what, 2010, what other indie albums were released in 2010? Because I don't remember that many. Because I think maybe Arctic Monkeys' Humbug was 2010.
Turtle Life Forever by Foals.
Okay, maybe people were actually getting quite serious in 2010.
High Violet by The National, which I just bought the
You bought the special edition.
Which is bloody lovely.
And you got Tame Impala's first album.
Brothers by the Black Keys, which is probably one of their best. Best.
This Is Happening, LCD Sound System, which is a cracking album.
That Field Music album's pretty decent.
Yeah. Everything's first album. Tell you what, 2010, pretty good year for indie music. This is like Enemy.
Because to be honest, like
heydays.
And that was when like Yes there were kind of interesting.
Bella and Sebastian was still interesting.
I sort of discovered Arcade Fire more. I'd like heard bits, like obviously Keep the Car Running from Neon Bible was like one of those songs that got played a lot. And there's a few songs from, The Suburbs. The song The Suburbs.
Yeah, The Suburbs and Ready to Start were all over the radio.
Yeah, so like obviously I'd heard but I hadn't actually. I think Reflect is probably the first album I actually like listened to properly. So I don't really have the context of like them at the time releasing this. Like I've got it as like a going back listening to.
Oh, I'm definitely the same.
But I wish I'd have been an Arcade Fire fan at this time and this coming out.
Well, something that I didn't realise as well when they released this, because this would have been prime HMV CD era. They released 8 different covers for the CD release. So you would go into HMV or buy it online, they would have the different covers and stuff
that's interesting.
of the album. And it's the same car, but in different parts of the suburbs of where they live.
Oh, that's cool.
So each album cover, I think it might be from, because there's a good 5 or 6 members. So I think is actually different suburbs that they actually live in where the pictures are from. And I'm like, why was I not part of this? It's like the whole because of the internet thing, or because of the internet.
Yeah.
Like,
if I'd have been part of it at the time, then it would have been... Because trying to find, like, track this down on vinyl and track Because the Internet down on vinyl, especially Because the Internet, can't fucking find it unless you want to pay
like
over the odds for it, which at the moment, no, but maybe if I get a bit richer, then maybe yes.
But the Suburbs, literally, you can only buy it from their store, and it comes from Canada. That's it. That's the only place you can buy it.
The interesting thing, talking of vinyl, if you haven't figured out already by listening to us, me and George are kind of sort of vinyl heads a little bit.
Yeah. Ever increasing.
they actually, when recording this album, they recorded the album, then they
cut it onto
12-inch vinyl, and then re-recorded that, like played that back and re-recorded that
but
back onto
each song is a single as well.
Right.
So it was 12-inch singles played at, is it 33 RPM?
Yeah. Or
So,
40, or maybe 45. Cause it's
It's faster,
better,
isn't it? 45, yeah. Yeah, so you've got, what, like 20-odd vinyls that's been cut onto. All of the... They're somewhere.
Somewhere
The
there are
original
those...
cuttings that are then recorded for the digital version.
So you get that sort of sound, that sort of slightly warm vinyl sound on the... if you listen to it on Spotify, that you're getting that...
Yeah.
Sort of getting that sound.
Which I think, in a way, it kind of distances you from how polished it could be. I think it's something that they tried to do with their first album, Funeral. Because that album is... The mixing of it is much to be desired.
Right.
But it does feel like they've tried to make it sound... Not necessarily old, but like... It's a memory. But it didn't work electronically. Like, obviously they'd done it digitally, Funeral. They tried to like degrade it and stuff. Whereas this, actually cutting it onto vinyl, then re-recording it from the vinyl, it does make the album feel like a memory of like your childhood and growing up in the suburbs.
Yeah.
Like, it was definitely a very good idea for them to do. And I haven't really heard of that happening that much. Because I've heard of the whole thing, record it digitally, run it through a tape machine.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's quite easy to do. A lot of people do that. Like, I think even Arctic Monkeys still do that all the time.
Yeah, but cutting it to vinyl.
Yeah.
And then that's quite a process in itself. It would be interesting to see them trying to convince whoever they needed to convince.
Oh yeah, it's been expensive.
To let them do that.
Yeah.
And
so
sort
they're
of
on
like...
Merge Records, which was independent at the time, but released through, I think, Mercury.
Right.
So, part of the Universal Music Group, so it is Universal.
Because like maybe I feel like we can hear it in the songs, but you know, maybe to most people it would feel a bit more sort of like, why are we bothering here? You know what I mean? Like, are we really going to hear the difference? That's an interesting list of records. Is this the producer?
Yeah, so the producer's Marcus Dravs. I assume that's how you say his surname.
So he's done the new Hozier album.
Yeah. Pretty much everything Arcade Fire since Neon Bible.
Quite a lot of Coldplay, by the looks of things.
A lot of Coldplay since
Viva
La Vida, by the looks of it. Some Maccabees stuff, which is interesting. And that's interesting because it's the only Maccabees album that wasn't done by Chenzo Townsend.
Right.
A lot of Bjork as well. Depeche Mode.
Florence and the Machine.
Yeah. Oh, he did How Big, How Blue, How Beautiful. Which, to be honest, looking at a lot of these albums, this seems like somebody who is he sounds like a mood producer, especially if he's working with Bjork.
Yes. But even like, I mean, Viva La Vida for me is where Coldplay really start to dip. But
for me, that was where they peaked. That was the last solid effort where Coldplay were actually like, let's try and make a good album.
But yeah, what I was going to say is, for me, like, Viva La Vida didn't really work for me.
Fair.
But it at least it really felt like they were going for something. And so you can imagine them going, let's go to the guy who did the Arcade Fire stuff.
Yeah.
Because they sort of... You almost feel like, actually, with Viva La Vida, Coldplay almost were trying to be Arcade Fire a little bit. Because Arcade Fire definitely have, like... I mean, if you look at them live, they do some crazy sort of stuff live with, like...
Quite big.
The way they dress and all this kind of stuff, and quite big. And I seem to remember with the Coldplay like Viva La Vida tour, they would definitely they would sort of dress in that sort of Les Miserables French Revolution sort of military wear and all that kind of stuff. So maybe it sort of feels like maybe that's what they were looking towards. Because what I know we're it's turning into a Coldplay discussion.
I'll tell you though, Viva La Vida 2008, 2 years before The Suburbs.
Oh shit!
Which is weird, and this is something that I've always noted about Arcade Fire. They sound so much older than all of their predecessors, or like they sound like the era they're aiming for, but they still sound fresh in a weird way. Like nothing they do sounds like a copy, but they still feel like they're living in that era that they're aiming for. Which is why like having David Bowie on Reflector works so well.
Yes.
Because it sounded like it should have come from the 80s.
I mean, it kind of sounds like a David Bowie record at points.
Yeah.
So it makes total sense. Interesting, so we were talking at the start of this. There's a deluxe version on Spotify of The Suburbs. And the last track on that deluxe edition, the last two tracks aren't on the main album, but the last track in particular features David Byrne from the Talking Heads.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how you must have a great album when you decide not to use the track you've recorded with David Byrne from Talking Heads.
We didn't actually listen to that one all the way through though, so potentially you didn't even play that much of a part in it. Because like David Byrne is on Reflector.
Yeah, but
they
like,
don't even feature him on it.
But you get David Byrne. You just feel like you get David Byrne. You use the song.
Yeah, true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it makes me respect Arcade Fire even more in the sense of like, it would have been very easy for them just to put it on.
Well, we did listen to it and we were like, yeah, this doesn't belong on The Suburbs.
Yeah.
And they obviously knew that.
And the fact that they recognised that and decided not to use it, I think, is it's a testament to like how mature they are in the way they go about making music.
Definitely.
I think that they're kind of weird because they're kind of a band you look at and they can actually be quite silly in terms of like some of the stuff they do. Yeah,
they kind of seem, if you just bumped into them in the street, I can imagine thinking that they're some weird hippie festival cult.
Yeah.
That just go around as a group of like 8 to 10 people that just go to festivals, get high and just fuck about.
Yeah. Because like part of their Everything Now tour, they were at Madison Square Garden, but they were playing like inside a boxing ring.
Yeah.
And so they're quite sort of slightly silly in that way, but then there's such a maturity to like the music they put out and the way they go about putting out the music.
I'd say they're almost surreal. It's not so much silly, because in the same way, like, so I was at Tate early with Jake, like I said, and we were going around like the like impressionist, like modernist section.
Yeah.
And I was looking at a Salvador Dali that I'd never really noticed before, and it was called like Autumnal Cannibalism or something.
Right.
And it looks quite silly because there's these like outstretched boobs and these figures falling into each other. But then you kind of look at it more and you realise that it's like, although it looks very much part of almost a comical autumnal meal, they're actually devouring each other in a capitalist like form.
Right.
And it's like, oh, actually, you're managing to use humour to get across this quite deep message about personal relations. That's kind of what this album does. That kind of, you grow up in the suburbs, you move to the city, and you kind of cannibalize your own emotions and forget who you were when you were in the suburbs. You're like distancing yourself from that, and it becomes this old distant memory where things were all clean and crisp and it was perfect. And it's like, well, actually no, it wasn't, but because you now live in the city and capitalism is your main form of life,
Yeah.
Now that makes sense. Oh,
we went down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think.
But they're very good at that.
They are very good at that, and
surreal.
And I think it's easy to be surreal. I think it probably is unfair me using the word silly, although actually
that's kind of what surrealism is.
Yeah, and actually I think some people can use silly as kind of a disparaging thing, whereas actually I'm a big fan of silly as a thing.
Well, you think of any great comedian, like you got your what's his name? The guy that we saw who was at the Leicester Square Theatre. Stuart Lee. Or your David Walliams. No. Robin Williams, sorry.
Yeah.
Both very silly. Like they'll do like 2-minute sketches talking nonsense. But it's actually about a very serious, poignant issue, and it actually makes you think while laughing.
Yeah, I mean, like Eddie Izzard is a great example of that. Or, I mean, everyone often says that Eddie Izzard is like, had he been born in the like much earlier, he would have been in Monty Python. But like Monty Python is like
Life
a great example of that, where they're talking about really actually kind of serious political issues a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly silly and surreal, and so like I'll say silly when most people, I think silly has become quite like just a term of like sort of just like disparaging something like.
Well, I think someone can think of silly as just someone doing something dumb on TikTok.
Yeah.
That's today's silly.
Yeah, whereas I'm still using silly in the Monty Python sort of Eddie Izzard sense of the word.
A distraction from the actual poignant fact of what you're trying to get across.
But like, there are bands like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, who I'm a big fan of.
But they're silly.
But they are silly. But I also don't think they are. They're sort of silly without anything to sort of back it up, which is fine because I'm quite happy for you to just be silly, right?
But then for me, they're being silly, but also allowing so many people that don't necessarily understand or want to understand very intellectual music theory. But they, due to their silly format that they create their music.
I mean, yeah, the whole microtonal
like
stuff.
I couldn't do that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I still really understand like the whole microtonal. I sort of get it, but I also I'm not like a really into like music theory or anything like that.
It's so much more. I find it more impressive to hear King Gizzard and Lizard Wizard make an actual digestible rock microtonal record that feels a bit silly than some weird avant-garde musician doing completely free jazz composition based around microtonal stuff. Because it's like, yes, they're both impressive, but actually making it more digestible for a mass audience is so much more difficult. Yeah,
I think just with I think what I was getting at with King Gizzard is like they are kind of silly, musically very impressive, but sort of like in terms of like deeper meanings behind the record. So like we talk about Arcade Fire, and there's definitely sort of a vision and actually King Gizzard and Elizabeth always have like a vision, but like in terms of like the deeper meaning behind the music, I'm not sure there necessarily always is with King Gizzard, because they are just a sort of band that they'll sort of just do what they want, and if they want to go and make a microtonal record because they find it interesting, they'll do it, and if they want to make a heavy metal record, they'll do it. Whereas Arcade Fire, and I think, you know, obviously King Gizzard released like one year they released like 5 albums in a year. Arcade Fire are a bit more sporadic with their album.
Yeah, there's a lot more fine tuning that goes into it. Like, it's very particular.
And I appreciate both ways of doing it. Like, I kind of respect King Gizzard for just being like, we're going to do this now, and we're not going to spend that long on it, and that's that and that's done, and now we're moving on to the next thing. And I kind of respect that because I wish I was a bit more like that with stuff I did in a way.
Well, that's kind of your difference between your like Salvador Dali and then someone like Jackson Pollock. Like, Salvador Dali, meticulously well painted oil paintings that, if it wasn't for the fact that they were visually completely obscure, you would think it's a masterpiece. Whereas Jackson Pollock looks like a bunch of paint being thrown and it's very instantaneous, but there's still the same amount of thought and research, and like the process and the emotive statement is still the same. It's just one takes longer than the other.
Yeah,
it's weird. Like, I like Arcade Fire for what they do, but also at the same time it's like it takes you a long time.
Yeah, because the gaps between albums.
Yeah, what is it?
I mean, just between
2004 to 2007.
It's a good 3 years.
Yeah.
Which isn't,
7 to 10, another 3 years.
Yeah.
10 to 13. Okay, Reflector's actually older than I think it is, in all fairness. 2013 is quite a while ago.
And then when was Everything Now? 2017, so another 4 years. So they're like, every 3-4 years they're putting out a record. Which I guess isn't, that long, but
it's not necessarily. It doesn't fit what you would expect a modern band to do. That's much more kind of 90s, 80s sort of.
Yeah. Did you see, and this is a tangent, but it's also relevant.
Get on the tangents.
What the Spotify CEO recently said that caused a lot of angst in the music community. So he was basically talking about, because obviously Spotify come under a lot of criticism because
underpaying artists.
They don't really pay.
Not crediting people on albums. Yeah. There's a few things.
It's quite a lot to go into. But he basically came out and said that artists can't expect to now just put out an album every 2-3 years. Like, what they should be doing is putting out stuff all the time, which obviously suits him and his business model, and I think probably suits the algorithm in terms of the way you would get noticed on Spotify if you just keep putting out content. But obviously a lot of people criticize that, because a lot of bands just can't afford to do that. A lot of artists can't afford to put out stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But also, some people saying, like Anthony Fantano talked about it, and he was like, you can't expect, like, quality's going to go down because you can't expect. Look at some of the greatest albums of all time. They took 3, 4, 5 years to make. What do you think about? Obviously, I've only given you the bullet point.
Yeah. There's something that I've thought about a lot, because obviously being a musician and trying to release stuff, there is a pressure to be constantly creating. But there's also, like, if you're building a house, it doesn't mean you're not also living somewhere else and doing something else to afford that.
Yeah.
So you can be releasing singles, EPs. They're maybe not quite the same quality, but because there's something quite beautiful about somebody releasing a single or an album that's very poignant of what they're doing then. Like, boom, I did this EP in 2 weeks. Here it is. This is me right now. I had a bad experience the other day in public. I wrote this song. Here we go. But in the background, you can still be working on a masterpiece. So you can have all of this kind of front page news stuff.
Yeah.
That's coming out every day, but then on the Sunday, so like, for the newspaper analogy, on the Sunday you have the bigger picture, the more like, this is what's been happening over the last 2-3 years, all rounded up in much more of a film-based structure, like more of a story. It's more of an adventure and a journey, whereas the rest of the time, just like feeding the audience seems to be becoming more is snacking.
Yeah. Which I think can work in it. But
It's not going to work for all artists.
no, and like I'm a big fan of the album as a thing. But then if you look at artists like, I mean, I think I think it's already, you haven't listened to all of it yet, but but one, I think already probably at the top or competing for the top album of the year for me is Taylor Swift's new Folklore album, which was apparently no one knew about it until she just dropped it. I don't know if that's true, but anyway, dropped it by surprise.
For Taylor Swift, no one knew about it.
Yeah. So dropped by surprise towards the end, a couple of weeks ago, towards the end of lockdown. And that is, for me, it might even be her best record, which is saying quite a lot given 1989. I think, but I mean, they're very different. So it's kind of hard to compare them because one's essentially a national record, which is probably why I love it so much.
Yeah.
And one's a pop record. But I think that as it's just a very well put together album, I think, and kind of quite well constructed. And so I look at that and think, would I want like Taylor Swift to just put out songs and not focus on an album? Because she is someone who, despite being a big mainstream pop artist, is very much still all about the album. But then I look at someone like Ed Sheeran.
I think he'd be better suited to regular single releases.
I don't know why. I mean, at this point,
why
do you bother with albums? Because they're never, you look at Taylor Swift and they're sort of on the same level, really, aren't they, in terms of like mainstream pop popularity. Taylor Swift clearly cares about trying to make an album, and each one, and whether they work or not is a different thing. But she clearly has a thing for each album. A theme. Yeah. Whereas Ed Sheeran,
well, let's be honest, he's basically just going through the numbers. Like, each album he's done, it's either the number 5 collaboration project, the number 6 collaboration project, or plus, divide, multiply. The next one's going to be what the next album's going to be. It's going to be a collection of Ed Sheeran songs that he's written over a year that will be bangers, but they won't be an album.
And actually, he'll probably release 4 or 5 of them as singles.
But no, like 6 to 8
beforehand, and then they're all going to be
number 1
shuffled into people's playlists, and they're all going to be in the charts because everyone's streaming them.
He just released this Divide. It's just a compilation of Ed Sheeran's greatest hits for the last 2 years that he's been writing.
So wouldn't it be better? And in a way, like in terms of what this Spotify guy is saying, like in those instances, I'm kind of like, why does Ed Sheeran bother with albums? Wouldn't it be better for his fans anyway if they could just have a regular Ed Sheeran song every month or two?
Well, like The Shape of You. Probably was finished within a month, maybe even a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
The only reason why it was delayed is because it was like, all right, well, we need to get enough songs together to make an album. If they could just have gone, all right, we've finished Shape of You. This is a finished song. This will be a banger. Release it.
Yeah.
A couple months later, we've finished another good single. Release it. Done. Just repeat that.
Yeah.
People would constantly be talking about Ed Sheeran. But he could also probably be getting multiple songs done and be like, well, actually, we've got the next year planned of singles for one every month. And people will just be constantly latching on. And
it feels like sort of why don't you do that? If you're that sort of artist, why not?
And that's the thing, like with Spotify, you've got some people who are playlist listeners and some people who still are
album listeners.
Yeah, they still use it like an iPod from back in the days. You've got your albums on there and you listen to it like that's as it is.
Yeah.
And for a playlister, I get it. Like if you're into your playlists, you don't care about albums because you build your own albums. Like you want to be able to put 40 songs into a playlist and go, cool, this is a mood of songs, and that's how I want to listen to them. I fully get that and respect that, and I think it's great that you can do that. But it isn't for everyone.
No, and it's not for every artist as well. And I think if the Spotify guy had come out and said something along the lines that we've just been saying, I don't think he'd have gotten as much criticism.
Yeah.
Where he gets criticism is like, that's not going to work if you're Arcade Fire or you're The National or
FKA Twigs
Twigs or someone much smaller who can't afford to be putting out songs all the time.
Yeah.
Or he still really cares about the album. But yeah, Ed Sheeran's. I don't. At this point, what is the point in putting out other than to finish off the whole? He has to put out Minus because otherwise it's going to be annoying for people's shelves.
Yeah,
because like if you don't have the last one,
you gotta have the full. But then does he get into the square roots and stuff? I don't know. We haven't actually spoken about the album that much, very particularly, but because I mean, it's 16 tracks?
Yeah.
It's a 16-track album, but it doesn't feel like a double album.
No, it does feel. It feels like one complete journey, to be honest. Because it is long.
I'd be interested to know whether, when it came to writing it, whether they did different songs, like they maybe came with like Ready to Start, Rococo, Month of May, Wasted Hours, like just met up and were like, oh, we got these songs, and then started piecing them together and like shuffling them around, or whether it was maybe more just the singer or just one writer of the band coming in and being like, I have this idea for a collection of songs, let's build off of this.
Yeah, because I think
because it tells a story.
Yeah, but I also think there's sort of movements to it. There's sort of songs that you can group together and they're like kind of complete. I mean, the fact that The Suburbs goes straight into Ready to Start for one thing, and then you've got...
And then straight into Modern Man.
And then you've got stuff like Half Like 1, Half Like 2, Sprawl 1, Sprawl 2.
Suburbs continued at the end.
So it feels like there's sort of movements, and it's a bit like the Kiwanuka album that we discussed. You know, there's that like that
the last
D, like side D, like all sort of goes into each other. And it feels like that's a complete, almost like an EP on its own sort of thing. I don't know if there's any necessarily here where it's like that you could just put that out as an EP on its own and that's the thing. But there definitely feels like there's...
it feels like it's maybe an album that's fueled by its own topic as well. Like I almost... Because the fact that the first track is The Suburbs and it ends with The Suburbs. I almost feel like maybe that was the first thing that was written. And it was like... almost such a connection to that song.
Yeah.
It was like, we need to expand on this.
Which is something they sort of did on Everything Now as well, actually.
Yeah.
They sort of come back to Everything Now at the end.
Yeah. So it's like actually, the album itself is almost just one song.
Yeah.
But just like, it's like introducing yourself to the story and then just continuing to write it as you go on. And just being like, oh, maybe they wrote Half Light next. We're like, oh, this would be such a good midway point between the two. And maybe that's kind of how they built off of it. Rather than kind of approaching it, okay, we've got a load of songs, how can we make them all make sense together? It was like, all right, we want to make an album about the suburbs. Now let's write songs about that.
Yeah, it's almost orchestral and classical in that way. It's almost like you've got the Planet Suite, and it's like, you know, it's like
the movements. Yeah,
like we start here. I can't remember the order of the Planet Suite, but it's, you know, we start with Jupiter, then we go to Mars, and then you know, it's that kind of thing. But it's a very complete like vision, and it's the same thing, but with different sort of diversions
Yeah.
We go over here for a little bit, and then we go over here, but we're still on the same street. We're just looking at different things.
Well, was it after this album that they then got asked to do the soundtrack for the Hunger Games?
I didn't know they did the soundtrack for the Hunger Games.
Yeah, I think it was the first one. They did the first films. They did like the main kind of hook, like the celebration soundtrack. But listening to the Suburbs, them doing a soundtrack for a film would make sense.
Yes.
I feel like the Suburbs...
The Hunger Games wouldn't be the film I would pick, but yeah.
After hearing the Suburbs, I would imagine some sort of Place Beyond the Pines...
Very much.
Drive,
indie
French house vibe.
Yeah.
French house? French noir vibe.
Yeah, nouvelle vague or whatever. Yeah.
Just very... Doesn't really go anywhere, but just makes you feel like you're in a set time and space and emotion.
Yeah, there's a lot of like Drive where you're just sort of watching Ryan Gosling not really do much, but just sort of like...
But it just envelops you in what it is.
And like you can feel so much without him doing anything.
Mm.
And I feel like that would fit with this sort of album.
I don't have that much actually to say about
specific songs or...
Like, I must admit, like, this is probably the longest I've looked at the track listing for this album. Because it is one of those, I very rarely stick it on without the knowledge of trying to get through it. I always want to stick this album on and go all the way through.
Yeah, because actually as well, to be honest, I couldn't tell you based on the track list, like specific songs, what they sound like. If you asked me what Suburban War's like,
I can't really
But you put it on and be like, oh, it's that one.
Yeah.
Because it is, as we were saying, I think it's a very complete album. And I think you want to listen to it as such. Obviously, like, the Suburbs and Ready to Start are like...
Yeah.
But that's because they were sort of the singles that you heard all the time.
Yeah.
And have kind of become synonymous with just Arcade Fire as a band.
Yeah. I mean, the only time I will know a song name is if, like, We Used to Wait. I only know because of the, oh, we used to wait.
Yeah.
Like, it uses the title.
Yeah.
And the same with Rococo. It's like, I can remember just the chorus, but I can't quite collect the whole song in my head because it's like, well, where does it actually start? Because the start is the end of Modern Man, but the end is the beginning of Empty Room, and they kind of merge into one. Which it's a really weird. There's not many albums like it. It's a weird one.
Yeah, and it's actually, as a result, quite hard to know what to say about it.
It's almost a cult album.
Yeah, because there's it's quite difficult, like you said, it's quite difficult to compare anything to it.
Yeah.
So therefore it's quite hard for me to pull in comparisons when you're talking, because when you talk about something, you want to go, oh, it's a bit like this, and it's a bit like this thing on this, and actually...
And also genre-wise, it falls across so many different eras and styles, because there's points where it gets punky, but there's points where it's orchestral, and then it gets into quite kind of gypsy jazz-esque territory, and you're like, it's just so all-inclusive.
But it's interesting as well, and I am going to draw a comparison now, but you say flicking between all those genres, and they've managed to make it sort of work, and that draws me back to the 1975 and the conversations we've had about them, and about how Brief Inquiry, they managed to do that. They managed to hit loads, but it still feels very complete. But then Notes on a Conditional Form, they did that, and it was like, whoa, there's too much going on here. And I think, again, that comes back to I think with Notes on a Conditional Form, I feel like they were like willfully
Pushing
not
it
caring.
Oh well, yeah.
Or well, caring is maybe a strong word, but like not. They like. It didn't really matter to them whether it was necessarily cohesive.
Yeah.
Whereas, I think it comes back to, and maybe saying like the maturity in Arcade Fire, because that's sort of implying 1975 aren't mature. But in a way, I kind of think that's sort of true in the sense of like, although you can see the 1975 are able to do it through Brief Inquiry, but it shows the Arcade Fire's like restraint as well at times of just being able to be like, you know, because clearly there are a couple of songs that weren't on this album, and I'm sure there were plenty of more songs that we haven't heard that didn't make the cut. And even though it is like 16 tracks long, quite a long album.
It's also hour and 4 minutes.
There's still a big, strong sense of cohesion and like restraint that they've shown that it's like, we don't, you know, it needs to fit the vision. It needs to like fit within these parameters sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, how would you conclude this album?
Well, I would say if you haven't listened to The Suburbs, then you need to.
Yeah.
But you need to listen to it in one go, I think. I think you need to put it on.
Yeah.
Find yourself some time where you've got an hour spare to just sit down and listen to it properly.
Yeah, because I think the first Arcade Fire album I bought was Neon Bible.
Mm.
And it was like, it's alright. Okay. Like, it's a good indie album.
Yeah.
It's alright. Suburbs, I never really got into. I remember really liking Ready to Start as a single. And then it probably wasn't until like 4 years later when Reflector was about to come out that I then listened to this all the way through, and it was like, holy shit, this is magic.
I think it like, I think that's true of their other work as well. Like not all of it works as well as The Suburbs, but I also think like listening to Arcade Fire, listen to their albums as complete albums from start to finish is the way to listen to them.
Yeah.
And the way to get an understanding of what they're doing with something.
Yeah, in a way they're not an easy listening indie band.
Mm.
They're definitely on the...
Despite what their sort of music might suggest that they kind of are.
Like, you can stick on a couple of their songs and yes, it's fun. But good God, it's so much better when you stick it on as part of an album.
Mm.
It's so well thought out. It's so detailed, and the production is usually very in-depth and layered and just very emotional and a journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, Suburbs. It's probably in my top 10 albums, I think, actually. It's a really good... Like, I can just stick it on in any mood, and it always will make me feel better.
That's going to be an episode we have to do, top 10 albums of all time. I mean, that would be a very difficult one.
Oh,
but
please.
It would be interesting.
100th episode special or something.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening, and thank you for watching, because that's a new thing, isn't it? So if you like what you heard / saw, then please do subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on whatever podcast platform you are listening on, and join us next time when we talk about George.
We're going to talk about Tom York's Anima. It is Anima, isn't it?
It is Anima.
I remember for ages I was calling it Anemia.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's Anima. So join us then. Thank you for watching and listening, and we shall see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.